Hello everyone, welcome to this brand new video. This is gonna be the first narrated video on the channel. After the last video I uploaded about the voice test, I was surprised with the feedback. A lot of people didn't have a problem with my lisp or my accent, but with my microphone. So I got a new brand microphone and I'm ready to give it a go. As you can see, it's gonna be a long series. For some reason all my tutorial series have a really long and in-depth analysis about the subject I'm going to talk about. So in this series we're going to talk about the arms, but I'm not going to fit all the information on one video. It's going to be about 3 videos. Every video going to have a lot of chapters, and I'm going to leave in the description a timestamp for every chapter to make it a bit easier to navigate. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to leave the text along with the voice just in case you want to mute the video and read the text like the old videos I released before this. So on this video we're gonna talk about the shoulders. The next video gonna be about the upper arm. The last one gonna be about the lower arm. In this video we're gonna talk about the shoulder bones, muscles, motions, body types, and on the end gonna be a summarizing chapter about the shoulders. Easy things to remember, the names of the bones, the muscles. Hopefully it will be enough for you to understand everything about the shoulders, how to draw it, how to understand it. So let's start with the first chapter. Okay, for the first chapter we're gonna talk about the bone structure of the shoulder area, mainly the scapula. But before I start drawing the scapula, I want to show you the 3D representation of the scapula to see how it connects with the torso, how it looks like in 3D. Now there's a software called the Human Atlas Anatomy or the Human Anatomy Atlas. I think it's for medical students. It's I think $25 or something like that. It has really nice representation for the human body, the bones, the muscles, everything. So I want to show you the look of the scapula before we draw it. Okay. Mainly it has a triangular shape with a cavity on the end. So it's more like this. We're gonna talk about the measurement later, but for now the shape of it is like a triangle with a spine. This is the scapular spine, and its placement is, if you divided this into 3, it's gonna be in the first third of the scapula. The scapula shape isn't straight, isn't like a straight triangle. It's curved with the rib cage to fit on it. And you see how the spine protrudes from the scapular body, and the spine rotates all the way to the acromion process over here. This part also shows under the skin. If you put your hand on your shoulder you will see this bony structure, so you can see it even under the skin. This is the clavicle attached to the scapula with a ligament. And this is the joint between the humerus and the scapula. So try to see this as you draw the scapula from the side or from the front. Don't just draw it like a 2D object, it's a 3D object curved with the rib cage. Okay? So now we're gonna start drawing it. I'm gonna start with the triangular shape with the cavity. The humerus and the humerus head. This is the clavicle. on the other side of the body. So it has like a rotating body from the spine all the way to the clavicle. The whole object, the whole arm is only attached to the torso with this clavicle part. The whole thing is attached from the rib cage. So there is no bone structure between the scapula and the back of the rib cage. It's only muscles and ligaments. This small protrusion is the coracoid process on the other side. So you have the joint, the shoulder joint, surrounded by bone structure from the spine and the acromion process and the clavicle and the coracoid, all together shaping this ball and socket kind of joint. So it only goes one way, it doesn't go to the other side. Okay, so this is the scapula from the back side. We're gonna now see the most important parts of the scapula. First we have the acromion process I talked about. It's the connection between the clavicle and the spine of the scapula. This will show up on the skin, under the skin, in any type of bodies. We have then the clavicle. Part of it will show up in every kind of body as well, mainly the front of it and somewhere in the last third of the clavicle. We have also the border of the scapula, the lateral border and the medial border. The medial border is a very telltale sign to where you can find the scapula on a body. This medial border will show up in any type of body as well. This is the spine, scapular spine, and we have the humerus head over here. And finally we have the coracoid process or coracoid process from the other side of the scapula. Right there. Okay, before we're gonna start with the other side of the scapula, the front side, we're gonna first see it in 3D. Now mainly the scapula from this side is hidden behind the rib cage, but we can still see the coracoid process over here, the head of the humerus, the clavicle. As you can see, the attachment with the acromion process. You can also see it right there. So this is the front side of the scapula. You can start the same way we started the back side. It's a triangle with a cavity for the joint. This is the humerus. And now we're showing the coracoid process from this side. Also we're going to see the clavicle and its attachment to the acromion process. Later on I'm gonna talk about how we can simplify this shape and all the measurement to make an exact copy of the scapula without going into very much detail, because all this scapula bones will be covered by muscles except for a few landmarks I'm going to talk about later on. Now, if you can't buy this software for the human anatomy, there is a website called Sketchfab. I think a lot of people know the Sketchfab is for 3D models, but you're gonna find like anatomy object and some 3D scan for people. I think this one is from Proco. It's free website. So try to use this website to check out the anatomy. I think this is from Proco. Very good representation for the scapula. So check it out to see how the bone structure work from all sides. You have to know the structure in 3D before you draw it. So you just don't draw a 2D representation of it. You have to understand the shape before you start drawing it. So this is the bone structure for the first chapter. Next chapter I'm going to talk about the placement of the scapula on different view of the body, the side, the back, like a turntable for the scapula on the rib cage. So let's start with that. Okay, for the placement of the scapula, the top corner sits around the third rib from the top, and the bottom corner of the scapula is between the 7th and 8th rib. This will give you a great guideline to where to put the scapula on the back, also from the front. Of course, I'm going to talk about the measurement later, but the distance between the two scapulas is 1 scapula apart. Now, if we calculated the size of the rib cage, if you divided the rib cage into 2, the bottom part of the scapula is exactly at the halfway of the rib cage. Now, as for the front view, the scapula is mostly hidden by the rib cage. With the muscles, you can't see anything from the scapula from the front view. But as a skeleton, you will see the coracoid process and the acromion process. Now, for the side view, the scapula, as we talked about in the previous chapter, it curves with the rib cage, so it's not straight, or it doesn't sit straight on top of the rib cage. And the acromion process go all the way to connect with the clavicle. In the 3/4 view, pay attention to the perspective when you draw the second scapula at the far away scapula. It will be foreshortened, so you have to understand the perspective between the first one and the second one. Also, counting the ribs help with the placement of the scapula. Now I added the top view to see how the acromion process connect with the clavicle. The rear end of the clavicle connect with the acromion process on top of the humerus joint. So if you want to draw the scapula, it's always good to start with the acromion process connecting with the clavicle, and you can follow it through the spine to the medial border of the scapula. From the medial you can draw the lateral border, and you can easily have the triangle of the scapula. So you can easily draw the scapula while paying attention to your top corner at the 3rd rib and the bottom corner between the 7th and 8th rib. Okay, now we place the scapula and the bones of the shoulder. It's time to talk about the muscles in the next chapter. Okay, before I start with the muscle structure, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the prefixes that we're gonna pass by when we studying anatomy. Some of these prefixes are driven from the Latin or the Greek language. Some of these prefixes like infra or inferior are lower or below, supra, superior, higher or above, sub for under, anterior, front, posterior, back, minor, small, major, big, medial, like we talk about in the medial border of the scapula, mean the center. Lateral mean away from the center. It can be left or right. Dorsal mean toward the back of the torso. Ventral mean toward the front of the torso. So just keep in mind the meaning of these words as we talk about the muscles, because we're gonna have a lot of them prefixing the name of the muscles. Okay, now talking about the muscles, before we start drawing them, there's a lot of muscle in the shoulder area. Some of them are deep under, and some of them are on top of the first layer. So not all of them are gonna show up on the surface. Some of them gonna be deep down. Unless you are a bodybuilder, then some of the muscles are gonna show up and be overdeveloped. Now the first group of these muscles are called the rotator cuff. These rotator cuff muscles there are 4 of them. The rotator cuff muscles, their job mainly to assist in the movement like abduction or adduction or elevation of the shoulder. Now I'm going to talk about the movement of the muscle in a later chapter. But for now, let's talk about the rotator cuff muscles. So the 4 muscles of the rotator cuff are the supraspinatus on top. Supra mean high, so this is the higher muscle. We have the infraspinatus, the lower muscle. We have the teres minor, the small muscle. Teres, by the way, mean a cylinder, so it's a small cylinder. This is the teres major, the bigger cylinder. So the rotator cuff contain 4 muscles. 3 on the back and 1 on the front. The subscapularis. Sub mean under, so it's under the scapula from the front side. So 3 in the back, 1 in the front. These are the rotator cuff. They all connect to the humerus, on top of the humerus, right here, and they rotate the humerus and assist with the movement. Also, they stabilize the joint inside the cavity, so it doesn't move away. Okay, for the first one, let's start drawing the first of the rotator cuff muscle. Okay, this is the supraspinatus. Supra, as we said, is the on top of the scapula. It's on top of the spine of the scapula. It will not show on the surface under the skin because it will be covered by the trapezius. The second muscle, the infraspinatus. This is the largest of the group. It will look like a flat area on top of your under your skin, like a flat area. But in bodybuilders, it will look very large, round, and very defined. The third muscle is the teres minor. It will not show all the time, but if you have like a defined athletic body, it will show like a triangle between or maybe like a dip between the infraspinatus and the teres major. We're gonna talk about the fourth muscle, the subscapularis, when we draw the muscles from the front. But for now, this is the teres major. Now this is a very important muscle. The teres major is from the scapulohumeral muscles group. These muscles, as it shows from their name, are between the scapula and the humerus. They connect the two parts together. There are 7 muscles in this group. Their job is to connect the scapula to the humerus, to move and rotate the arm, also stabilizing the joint in the cavity in the scapula. So the teres major is the most notable muscle in this group. It will show up in any body type. It will show up in thin people, in athletic, in bodybuilders. So the word teres means cylinder, as we said, minor cylinder and the major cylinder. So this will show up between the under the infraspinatus and under the skin. It will show up when you raise your arm, when you extend your arm, when you pull your arm together. It will show up as a round muscle. Now this is the first layer of muscles, the underlayers. On top of these layers, we have another group. Some of these muscles will hide some of this underlayer, like the trapezius will hide the supraspinatus, so it will not show up under the skin. So this is the trapezius, and then there is the deltoid. The deltoid, of course, is very known even for people who doesn't know anatomy. They know the deltoid. It comes from the Greek letter delta. The letter delta show up like a triangle. So this deltoid look like a triangle on top of the shoulder. It defines the shape of the shoulder. It also consists of 3 heads. We have the anterior head, the middle head, the posterior. Of course, we know the anterior means the front, the middle, and posterior means the back. The deltoid reach from the spine of the scapula all the way to almost half of the humerus. So if you divide the humerus in 2, it almost reaches the half point of the humerus. The deltoid, of course, assists in the movement of the arm. We're going to talk about it later. And it also stabilizes the joint inside the cavity. All these muscles stabilize this joint with the scapula, the humerus with the scapula. Now on the front side, the last part of the rotator cuff is the subscapularis. This will never show up under the skin because it's deep down between the back muscles and the scapula. But it also helps with the rotation of the humerus and the stabilizing effect. The other muscle I draw here is the coracobrachialis. It connects from the coracoid process toward the humerus, but I'm going to talk about this muscle in the second video, in the upper arm, because it's going to be very important to the upper arm more than the shoulder. Now let's see these muscles on 3D from the other side. This inside here is the subscapularis. Of course, it's covered by the pecs, by the deltoid, by the trapezius. This is the deltoid, the posterior, the medial. The bigger part is the medial. We have the anterior covering. So from the surface, the top 2 muscles that will show up are the infraspinatus and the teres major. We have the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, and the deltoid. So these are mainly the muscles of the shoulder. If we hide these, we have the subscapularis. It's not going to show up. Okay, so let's draw what covers them up. on the second layer. Now, of course, you don't have to know all these muscles. Some of them will not show up under the skin, as I said. But it's really good to know what's under the hood, what's under the surface. I will show you in a different chapter all the landmarks of these bones and the muscles that show up on the surface. But it's always good to know how things work out under the hood in order to understand what they look like outside, on the outside. Now this is the supraspinatus shown up from the back. Also the teres major and minor, but all of this is going to be hidden by the front muscles. On the front we have the trapezius showing on the last part of the clavicle, the third part of the clavicle. We have the large muscle of the pectoral major, and we have the anterior head of the deltoid and the medial head, covering up most of the front muscles of the scapula. Next chapter we're going to talk about the placement of these muscles on a turntable from all the sides, like we did with the bone structure. In this chapter we're going to talk about the muscles that will show up under the surface. In the previous chapter we saw all the muscles. In the previous chapter we talked about all the muscles of the shoulders. Now we're going to talk about the main muscles that will show up. Now the three main muscles of the shoulder and the back are the trapezius, the deltoid, and the latissimus dorsi. Between these three muscles lies the scapula with the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the teres major. But the two main muscles that will show up are the infraspinatus and the teres major. The deltoid will show the posterior head, and the middle head of the deltoid will show in the back side. The teres major is on top of the latissimus dorsi, so it will show up above the latissimus dorsi, so it will not be covered under it. Also on the back we will see the spine of the scapula showing up because there is a little gap between the deltoid and the trapezius, so it will also show up under the skin. On the front side you will only see the edge of the trapezius, the anterior and the middle head of the deltoid, the pecs with a slight gap between the pecs and the deltoid. You will also see parts of the clavicle, the front of the clavicle as a bump above the pecs. On the side view, all the heads of the deltoid will be visible: the medial, the anterior, the posterior, and the middle. We will also see the trapezius and the pecs, and we will see a hint of the infraspinatus and the teres major. In the three-quarter view we will see everything we saw on the back side, but we'll see more of the middle head of the deltoid. Now as for the top view, you can see all the muscles we talked about. But here you will see how the teres major is above the latissimus dorsi, as we said. So it will show up no matter what. Also, the infraspinatus will show as a flat area unless it was really developed. Finally, notice how the deltoid is big. It's not a small muscle. Beginners usually underestimate the size of the deltoid. They make it a little bit shorter or smaller. It has to cover the scapula and the humerus from all sides. And as I said, it's almost the halfway of the humerus, so it's a big muscle. Keep that in mind. So these are the muscles from all sides. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the landmark of the muscles and the bones on the skin. After we learned about the bones and the muscles of the shoulder area, we're going to see what's going to show up from the previous bones and muscle structure. So I'm using the illustration we did in the previous chapter. We did first the bones and the muscles. So as you can see, I'm following the exterior edge of the muscles. The skin, of course, is gonna follow the muscle structure. Now we're gonna see some bumps on the skin from the muscles underneath it, like this trapezius bump, the corner of the trapezius where it changed direction, or the edge of the medial border, or the edge between the infraspinatus and the teres major. When we start painting, these bumps gonna show up in highlight or in the shadows, depending on the direction of the light source. So to sum up the landmarks, the bone landmarks from the back side, we're gonna see the scapula spine. As we said, there's a gap between the trapezius and the deltoid, so we're gonna see the spine under the skin, and we're also gonna see the medial border of the scapula, and of course the acromion process. This little dip in the skin is the acromion process connection. For the muscles landmark from the back view, we have of course the deltoid, we have the trapezius. Mostly the trapezius corner gonna show up as a bump on the skin. The flatness of the infraspinatus gonna be a major landmark, and of course the roundness of the teres major. Now as for the front view, the bones landmark are the clavicle, the front of the clavicle, and the acromion process at the end of it. As for the muscles, we're gonna see in an athletic developed body, we're gonna see the edge of each of the heads of the deltoid. We're gonna see the gap between the pecs and the deltoid, and of course the pecs, the corner of the deltoid with the pecs on the humerus, and finally the trapezius connecting to the clavicle. Anatomy is essential to draw correct, accurate human bodies. Now after this chapter, we're gonna see the skin, how this can look like on different views like we did in the previous chapters. Okay, now we already did the front and the back view in the previous chapter, so let's continue to the other views. In the side view, the dominant muscle is the deltoid, and all the three heads will be showing up. Now as you can see, there's a hint of the teres major and the infraspinatus from the side, peeking behind the deltoid. We will also see the chromium process. It will look like a bump above the deltoid and to the side of the clavicle. In the three-quarter view, we're gonna see the same muscles as we saw in the back view. The infraspinatus, the teres major, they're gonna show up between the three main muscles: the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, and the deltoid. Also, the medial border of the scapula gonna be a turning plane between the infraspinatus and the trapezius. It's gonna show up in between shadows and highlights. Also, obviously, the acromion process will look like a bump. This bump is the trapezius muscles. Then there's a dip, the acromion process. Then we're gonna see the deltoid. Finally, in the top view, we're gonna see the acromion process. It's gonna be very obvious. It's gonna be a flat plane between the deltoid and the trapezius. We're gonna also follow the acromion process to the spine of the scapula, and from the spine we're gonna go all the way to the medial border. It's like an S curve from the from the clavicle to the acromion process to the medial border. You can always follow this guideline to identify the surrounding muscles of the scapula. The first thing you're gonna see is the medial border and the spine of the scapula, following the acromion process. The teres major and the infraspinatus will show above the latissimus dorsi because they are on top of it. And also make notice of the size of the deltoid. It's a big muscle, and it's gonna show up dominating the shoulder area. Now let's see some examples of the shoulder in real people. So I'm gonna go to the website Sketchfab. I already talked about this website. There is some 3D scan people. It's a very good scan of an athletic body. You can see here the teres major. It will always show up. This other bump is infraspinatus. This is the corner of the trapezius. You can see the clavicle to the acromion process, the head of the deltoid, and you can always follow the acromion to the spine to the medial border. You see another example with the arm raised up. You can see this is how obvious the acromion process is. It's a flat plane. This is the deltoid, the medial head, the anterior, the posterior. With the arm raised up, the scapula will be moved up and to the right. So we can follow the medial border. You can see here the acromion process, teres major going underneath the arm. This is the trapezius corner. This flat area is the infraspinatus, and this is the teres major. Posterior head, the medial head, the anterior head. Now let's see some extreme example of the muscles in a bodybuilder. You can see it clearly here. I don't know if this is a body scan or a 3D model, but also you can see the acromion process, the three big heads. Of course, they are overdeveloped, so it's gonna be much clearer to see them. The teres major, the infraspinatus, and this little dip is the teres minor. Latissimus dorsi, and you have the spine and the medial border. By the way, there's also another website called Anatomy 360. It's a very nice website with a lot of references in 3D. You can check it out. For example, let's see this. With the arms raised up, you can see the teres major going all the way to the arm. The acromion process. If you change the light, you can change the light with pressing shift. You can see the spine and the medial border. This is the infraspinatus, and of course the deltoid, all three heads. Another example. With the arms pushed back, you can see the flat area here for the infraspinatus and the big area with the teres major. Sorry. This is the scapula with the spine, the acromion process, with the arms raised all the way up. You can see clearly the chromium process, teres major, and the infra. Look how the scapula is rotating almost to the side, leaving a little bump on the side of the arm of the body. Also on the Anatomy 360 website, you will find the demo build 1.2. They are planning to do this as a final product, final application. It's really interesting. You can see here male model. You can change the light. It's really nice application. Let's look at the scapula. This is the chromium process. It's very clear here. You have the spine and the medial border, the infraspinatus, the teres major, the deltoid. Here we have the trapezius pushed back, teres major, the infra, the deltoid. Very nice application. Okay, in the next chapter we're going to talk about the movement of the scapula. There are three different movements with three counter movements to them. For example, we can raise the shoulder up and we can lower it down. So the first movement is the elevation. It's when you raise your shoulder up but keeping your arm down. Now this action will move the scapula upward with a slight rotation anti-clockwise upward. So the upper corner of the scapula that used to be on the third rib will be almost on the first rib, and the lower corner of the scapula that it was between 7th and 8th rib is going to be around the 5th rib. So it's going to rotate a little bit almost to the edge of the rib cage. Now the clavicle connection with the torso, with the monobrium, will stay in its place, but the other side of the clavicle that's attached to the chromium process will be raised up around 20 to 25 degrees. So the clavicle will rotate with the scapula, raising the arm up. So the reason for the rotation of the scapula is the clavicle staying in its place from one side and rotating from the other, pushing the scapula away from the rib cage. Now the counter movement of this elevation is of course the depression, lowering the scapula back down, doing the clockwise rotation back to its previous place. The third movement is the protraction, which is moving your shoulder forward while keeping your arms down. So like you're pushing your shoulders toward your torso. Now with this action your scapula will slide around the rib cage almost to the side, moving your arm toward your chest. When you do that, the scapula almost will be at the edge, the bottom corner will be at the edge of the rib cage. Now when you look at the scapula at that position, you will see that the bottom corner is almost at the edge of the rib cage, while also rotating the scapula anti-clockwise upward. Of course, the counter movement to the protraction is the retraction, moving your shoulder backward and even beyond the default position. So pushing your arms backward. In this position, your scapular medial border will almost be vertically aligned with the spine. The default position is rotated a little bit. When you push your shoulder back, it will be almost vertical with the spine. Now the fifth movement and the sixth movement is raising your arms up and down. This movement has three stages. The first stage, when you move your arm around 30 degrees, at this stage your scapula will stay the same. It will not raise up with the arm. So you can only raise 30 degrees and your scapula will be in the same position. The second stage, when you raise the arm above the 30 degree, almost to the 90, between the 30 and the 90 degrees, your scapula will rotate with the arm anti-clockwise between 20 to 30 degrees. So your arm will be straight to the side, 90 degrees, and your scapula will be around 20 to 30 degrees rotated anti-clockwise. Also, your clavicle will rotate with your arm around 10 to 15 degrees. The final stage, when you raise your arm all the way up 180 degrees, your scapula will rotate almost outside your ribcage limit 40 to 60 degrees, and your clavicle will rotate between 20 and 25 degrees. In this stage, your scapula lateral border will be outside the edge of your ribcage, causing the muscles from the teres major to look like a bump on the sides of your chest area. The counter movement, of course, is lowering your arms down, exact opposite of the movement. To sum up the 6 movements, they are basically moving your scapula up and down, front and back, rotating up and rotating down. In the next chapter, we're going to see how this movement affects the body, how they affect the skin and the muscles underneath them. So we're going to see all this movement in action. Okay, in the case of the elevation movement, you're going to see like two lines, two hard edge lines between the medial line and the spine. The teres major and the infra spinatus will be also pushed as well back toward the spine. So they're gonna look a bit bumpy than usual. On the top of the shoulder, the acromion process will look a bit more defined than usual because the trapezius muscle will be bumped up and the deltoid. So you're gonna see like a deeper depth between the trapezius and the deltoid. That would be the acromion process, since the trapezius will be pushed up along the way. Now in the depression movement, lowering the scapula down, you're gonna see a smoother surface between the trapezius and the scapula. When you lower your own shoulders down, you're gonna push the teres major toward the latissimus dorsi, resulting in some more defined shape to the teres major. The trapezius will be pushing the shoulder toward the latissimus dorsi, making a hard edge between the latissimus dorsi and the teres major. Now the third movement, the protraction of the shoulders, it will push the scapula toward the spine as well, but even more extreme than the elevation. Also, while pushing the scapula toward the spine, it will rotate a little bit, showing the medial border almost as a vertical line aligning with the spine. As you can see, you can follow the acromion process to the spine, to the medial line, as one long path between the acromion process and the corner of the scapula. You can see the line very clearly because the whole area is tensed up. The counter movement to that, the retraction movement, the scapula are pushed forward toward the torso as we discussed in the previous chapter. So the trapezius will be stretched out, smoothing all the area between the spine and the trapezius. It will also make the infraspinatus and the teres major look like one muscle. Because they are both inflated in the same time, they will look like one muscle. Finally, for the arm rotation, I'm gonna draw one person raising his arms up. So it's gonna be like 4 stages. The first stage, the scapula is still in the same location, but the muscles around the shoulder are all tensed up, ready to move the arm up. And of course the arm are 30 degrees away from the body, but no movement for the scapula. in the second stage, when the arms are raised a bit more, we're gonna see the scapula rotating along with the muscles that connect to it. Now when the scapula rotates, it will push the trapezius toward the spine, causing more hard-edged line between the trapezius and the medial line. We're also gonna see the medial line rotating counterclockwise with the scapula. Now in the third stage, when the arms are above 90 degrees up, we're gonna see clearly the rotation of the scapula. If you can see the medial line, it will be a bit more rotated counterclockwise. And also the teres major will be stretched out toward the arms. Remember that it's connected to the humerus from the front sides. Also all the heads of the deltoid will start creasing along the spine of the scapula and the acromion process. It will be like bent toward the bones. So all the muscles gonna be showing this hard edged line between the deltoid and the trapezius. It will make every head of the deltoid more defined. For the final stage, as we talked before, the scapula is almost past the ribcage line, so it's gonna leave like a bump on the side of your chest. This bump is the teres major, going all the way up with the arms, leaving this bump on the side. The medial border, as you can see here, is almost horizontal to the body. It's not 100% horizontal, but it's rotated counterclockwise almost to 40 to 60 degrees. The deltoid completely squeezed with the spine and the clavicle, showing very hard edge between it and the trapezius. You can always see the acromion process, the spine of the scapula and the medial line in every pose. You can draw every muscle by following this line. You will know the condition of the scapula by following this line, and thus you can draw the surrounding muscles by understanding where the scapula is. In the next chapter, I'm going to talk about the simplification of the shoulder area, how we're going to draw the arms and the shoulder area in a more simplified way, so you don't have to go into such details, especially if you're going to draw cartoons or anime or other type of drawing that doesn't need all this kind of detail. Like you want to draw a character with costume, or you don't have to draw every muscle and bone under it. So we're going to talk about this next. Now you can hint at certain landmarks without the need to draw every single muscles underneath it. For the first example, you can see you can just draw the joint as circles, connect them by simple lines like bones, and just draw on top of it the hint of the deltoid. It's a little bit bigger than the upper arm, also a hint for the clavicle, and a hint for the deltoid. Another option is to draw the famous Androlumis mannequin. The mannequin of the Androlumis is very simple. It's like the whole chest area is one smooth rectangle with two triangles for the deltoid, circles for the joints, and a line for the arm. If you want a bit more details for your drawings, you can just hint for the muscles border or for the landmarks of the bones, a simple hatch between the deltoid and the biceps or between the deltoid and the pecs, just a simple hatch line will do. So you don't have to go full detail on every muscle, especially if you're going to cover them later. So a simple hatch can define the muscles without the need to define every single side of it. Now the hatching will define the muscles, but you have to know what muscles are you hatching. That's why anatomy is important, to know the muscles that you're hatching, the bones you are hatching are in their correct place. So anatomy is the key to make the drawing more solid and less messy. The important thing is to just draw the body in its correct form, the muscles in the correct form, and you can simplify it as much as you want. Just make sure the body parts are fitting together in the right way. A simple dip for the acromion, a simple line for the deltoid, a simple line for the trapezius and the clavicle, and you will have a perfect, accurate body even if it's not fully detailed. So these are some of the examples. You can go as simple as this one, and you still can see hints for the acromion process and the deltoid and the rest of the muscles. Now in the next chapter we're going to explore more the difference between the body types, like males and females, and different athletic thin bodies, bodybuilders, in the next chapter. Okay, first we're going to talk about the difference between the male and the female bodies. The obvious difference is, of course, the male body is more rigid, there's more defined muscles, while the female body, of course, is smoother and curvier. So you can see the male body has more defined shape, more defined muscles, larger size, And of course the clavicle in the male body is probably 10 to 15 degrees. In the female bodies, between 40 to 60 degrees. This will result, of course, in the wider shoulders in the male bodies. The shape of the torso in the male bodies is wider on the top, narrower on the bottom, while the female is narrow at the top and wider in the bottom. Now to see the differences in 3D, we're gonna go to the Anatomy 360. They have a really good demo that you can not only you can see the muscles of the male body, you can also switch to the female body and you can see the smoothness of the muscles and the difference between them and the male body. As you can see, it's more defined, more rigid, and much wider on the top. While the female is narrower, they are almost blend together in the scapula. I can see the teres major and the infra spinatus look as one muscles. They aren't defined as much as the male body. Of course they are different poses, but you can still see even the silhouette shape is more rigid. While the female is a bit more curvy. Now for the other body types, for the male body, the difference is basically the muscle mass. The more you work out on your muscles, the bigger they're gonna be, the more defined they're gonna look. So in the thin bodies, they're gonna look smooth, they're gonna look a bit small, they're gonna look like one mass. In the aesthetic, you're gonna have more definition for your muscles, and of course in the bodybuilder, they're gonna be a lot more extreme. Now on the other hand, as you grow older, the muscles they will start losing some of their mass, and the skin will get a bit more saggy, so they will all blend together in one. They won't be as defined in old people as younger people. Now in the next chapter we're gonna draw a simplified body in line art, but from all different views, like a turntable for the simplified torso. This is gonna be like a good practice for figure drawing later on. Okay, in this chapter we're gonna draw the body the way we're gonna see it. We're not gonna draw every single muscle or every single bone. We're only gonna draw what we're gonna see in the final product. So when you're aiming toward the character design or the figure drawing, this is what you're gonna see in most cases. You can simplify the version of the torso, the bones, the scapula, the muscles. Just draw what you're gonna see in the final product. Now of course I'm planning for another series soon after the anatomy for the figure drawing, like top 5 ways to draw the figure, or how to start drawing the figure. As you can see, sometimes I use the mannequin, sometimes I use the peanut shape. Hopefully soon I'm gonna start the new series, but of course it's not gonna be one video, it's gonna be a lot of videos, like every time. When you are drawing the figure or the character, don't rely 100% on anatomy. If you rely only on anatomy, your drawing gonna be very stiff. They're gonna look very detached from a normal body. They're gonna look very solid. So just remember that you are drawing a human body. It's more dynamic. It's more there's more action in the body than just muscles and bones. So you have to combine your knowledge in anatomy with the dynamic sketching. Your goal with studying anatomy is to draw a better shaped figures, not to 100% draw every single muscle exactly as it looks like. Because we are not studying anatomy for medical purpose. We are studying anatomy for the artistic purpose. So make sure your dynamic sketching capture the mood and the character of the person you are drawing or the character you are drawing. As you can see, simple hint of lines here and there describe a whole bunch of muscles group. Line weight is very important in figure drawing. The muscles in the interior shouldn't be as defined as the muscles on the exterior. The outline of your body is more important than the inner lines. Maybe some days we can talk about the line weight on a different series. Just always remember, when you're drawing a simplified version, less is more. Don't draw every single muscle. If you can hint at a muscle or hint at a landmark, just use the minimal amount of lines. Now in the next chapter we're gonna do a complete painting of the shoulder area, from sketch to line art to values to coloring. Now of course I'm not gonna add the detail of the whole arm because we didn't study it yet, just to the shoulder area. So I start with the mannequin. It's the most simple way to start a figure drawing. You have the rib cage, the scapula as triangle, simple bone for the humerus. I'm not gonna worry about the ulna or the radius for now. we're gonna talk about the ulna and radius in the lower arm section. So for now the arm is a bit raised up, so I know that the scapula gonna be rotating counterclockwise, pulling the teres major and the infraspinatus with it. So all the dynamic of the muscles around the scapula gonna move along the way. Now after the initial sketch, I'm gonna tighten up the line art a little bit, put more details in it. It's not important, but because all of this line is gonna be painted over, I'm not gonna care about the hands either. The focus in this painting is the shoulder area. Now when you start painting the values, pay attention to the light source. Every muscle that is facing the light source will be highlighted. Every muscle that is turning away from the light source will be in the shadows. But of course the shadow and the highlight are a bit smoother than a mechanical object. Now you can see here the teres major is a bit more pulled away with the arm, so it's more stretched, and it's stretching the latissimus dorsi underneath it. And the medial border is rotating along with the arm. Now the chromium process is very defined here. It's facing the light source, so it's gonna be in highlight, and it's a flat area, so it's gonna be all in highlight. But around it the deltoid is bent on the chromium process, so they're gonna be more defined deltoid with a bit more shadow underneath it. So all three heads gonna show up here, the interior, the posterior, and the middle. When you start coloring, make sure you add some different hues. Don't paint the whole thing in yellow or in red. In places where the muscles are tensed or squeezed together, they're gonna be more red hues to it. There are gonna be more blood vessels in this area. So the place in the bottom of the deltoid or under the arm, they're gonna be more red hues. The flat area of this infraspinatus is gonna be more toward the yellows, toward the grayish. The muscles define the colors they're gonna be painted over. So try to make your colors more dynamic by differentiate the tones of the muscles with red and yellow hues. And also you can use some grayish, green for the bony landmarks or for the shadowy area. I also added some purple for the shadows underneath the arm. So don't just use black and white for your painting, or it will look very flat. Now in the next chapter, I'm gonna do like a summary for all what we discussed so far. I'm also adding some quick and easy info for you to remember, for like measurements and names, and some quick info to remember and to memorize as you go along. So everything we didn't cover in the past chapters, I'm gonna do a quick run over for the rest of the information. Okay, we're gonna start with the measurement. This is gonna be a quick summary, so we're not gonna draw anything, we're just gonna look at the information in a quick way. So when you want to draw the scapula, let's start with the head. The male body consists of 7.5 to 8 heads. So let's draw a line. Divide the line into 3 heads. This will cover the head and the torso. For the torso, the width of the torso is 2 heads. So 1 head on the right, 1 on the left. The width of the torso is 2 heads. As for the length, it starts with the first third of the second head to the last third of the third head. Okay, when we draw the torso, now to draw the scapula, let's divide 1 head unit to the left of the rib cage and 1 head to the right. And then we're gonna divide that area into 2 halves. So we have half a head to the left and half a head to the right. So the width of the scapula is 1 head and a half. As for the top and bottom parts, it starts as we know from the third rib. So we can add a line under the rib cage, a little bit below the rib cage, and stop at half the rib cage mark. If we divided the rib cage into two, the scapula stops at the halfway of the rib cage. Now when we draw the scapula, if we divided the scapula into 3/3, the end of the first third is where the spine of the scapula starts, and it goes all the way to the humerus. Now remember that the space between the two scapula is 1 scapula apart. Now let's talk about the ball and socket joint type of the shoulder. As we talked before, the shoulder is a ball and socket joint. It means that the ball-shaped surface of the humerus fits in the cup-like depression of the scapular cavity. This way the arm will have an indefinite number of axes to rotate upon with the common center. So the common center is the cavity in the scapula, and we have a ball-like shape, and it rotates in different axes. So this is the axis of the rotation. It can rotate on different axes. This is a simplified way to see the joint. You can see it as the scapula, this is the ball, and this is the socket. And it will rotate in the same way. This is the rotation of the humerus. Of course, when you go all the way up, it's gonna rotate along with the scapula. So it's gonna start rotating this way. When you reach above 30 degrees. So if you can see, when you reach around this area, the whole scapula will start rotating. Now we already talked about the bones and the muscle structure of the scapula, but here are the most important things to remember. These are the ones you need to pay attention to. Try to draw them a lot, to memorize the name as much as you can. If you draw it like 5-10 times, you will remember the names. I tried this before. I couldn't remember any names, but when I draw it more than 10-20 times, the names become like second nature. You can remember it for a long time. It will be hard at first, but as you do it a couple of times, it will be easier. Now you have to remember there are 3 main parts of the shoulder: the clavicle, the scapula, the humerus. 3 bones: the clavicle, scapula, and the humerus. And 4 main parts of the scapula that will show up on the surface: the medial border, the acromion process, the coracoid process, and the spine of the scapula. Try to draw them as much as you can till you memorize these names and these places. Now in this section we're gonna talk about the origin and the insertion of each muscle. Now the importance of this information is to understand what each muscle do and where it's located. So the first muscle, the supraspinatus, it originates from the supraspinous fossa. By the way, the word fossa or fossa means a small depression in the bones. The supraspinatus originate from the supraspinous fossa in the upper half of the scapula, and it's inserted in the head of the humerus. So it originates from the top of the scapula, inserted in the top of the humerus. The second muscle is the infraspinatus. It will show up on the surface. It originates from the infraspinous fossa and inserted in the top of the head of the humerus. Remember, the 4 muscles of the rotator cuff insert all in the top of the humerus. Now the teres minor, it originates from the ridge of the lateral border on the bottom of the scapula and insert in the top of the humerus. The teres major, it originates from the inferior corner of the scapula, the bottom corner, and the insertion is the front of the humerus bone. That's why it will show up when you raise your arm up. It will show as a bump because it's rotating from the scapula all the way to the humerus. Now the deltoid, of course, we studied the deltoid with the three heads. We have the posterior, the middle, and the anterior. The posterior head of the deltoid originates from the spine of the scapula all the way to almost half the way to the humerus. As we said, the deltoid is a big muscle, so it reaches from the spine of the scapula all the way to the almost half the way of the humerus, on the side of the humerus. The middle head of the deltoid originates from the acromion process area. It stretches from the spine of the scapula, acromion process, and almost to the beginning of the clavicle. And it stretched out, inserting itself in the humerus along with the posterior head. Now the anterior head starts from the first third of the clavicle all the way to the humerus. Now the insertion part of the deltoid have three different insertion points. The anterior insertion is the highest of the three heads, followed by the posterior, and finally the lowest point of the insertion will be the middle deltoid. So the insertion, we have the anterior, under it we have the posterior, and under that we have the middle head insertion. And as you can see here, the three muscles combined. You can see the deltoid hiding parts of the underlayer muscles. Okay, now let's talk about the connection of the shoulder to the other bones and other muscles, starting with the bones. Now from the back, there is no bone connection between the scapula and the ribcage. It lays on top of the layer of interior muscles between the scapula and the ribcage. So when you raise your arms up, it moves freely up and down or left or right. From the front, the spine of the scapula connects to the clavicle at the acromion process. So this is the only connection with the clavicle. And the clavicle, of course, connects to the sternum at the manubrium with a sternoclavicular ligament. So this is the only connection between the scapula and the torso. Now as for the muscles, from the back, trapezius connects the torso to the arm at the spine of the scapula, pulling the scapula to the top or left or the bottom direction toward the spine. On the front we have the pectoralis major muscle. The connection is at the clavicle and the sternum and connects behind the deltoid on the humerus. It pulls the arm toward the torso. It assists with the rotation of the humerus, pushing the humerus up and down or pulling it back. So this is the muscle connection between the arm and the torso. Finally, in the last part of the summary, it's very important to see how we can pick up the shoulder muscles and bones from reference photos. This exercise is essential to do, and it will help you a lot understanding the anatomy on existing bodies. So you don't just study muscles and bone detached from the body. You have to know how to pick it up from the reference photo. It's hard to know where the scapula is from the front view, but you can always start with the acromion process and the clavicle. These are the two hands for the bones of the shoulder. So the acromion process will look like a dip, as we said before. Once you find the dip of the acromion process, you can follow it to the clavicle, and you can follow it to the other side to the spine of the scapula. So these are all the clothes you can find from the front side. But once you study the anatomy of the shoulder, you will know that the acromion sits on top of the humerus, so you can draw the humerus head, and from the head you can follow it to the humerus bone, all the way to the elbow. And by knowing the size of the scapula, as we said it's half the rib cage, you can draw the rest of the scapula from these hints. As for the muscles of the in the front view, it's easy to spot the muscles in a well-developed body. First of all, the pecs are very defined. You can follow the dip between the pecs and the deltoid to see the anterior head of the deltoid and the medial head of the deltoid. So these dips and lines will show where the muscles are. From the side view, you can see the clavicle and the dip of the acromion process, a hint of the medial border, and the spine of the scapula. From these clues we can fill in the rest. We can follow, of course, the spine of the scapula and the medial border to draw the rest of the scapula. And from the acromion process, you can draw the head of the humerus all the way to the elbow. And of course, the clavicle connects to the acromion process. So we have all the bones here. As for the muscles, we can see the dip between the pecs, the insertion point under the deltoid. You can also see the lines of the deltoid, the medial border. You can see the middle part of the deltoid, the anterior and the posterior. You can see a bump of the infraspinatus and the teres major. Now in the back view, always follow the line of the acromion process, spine of the scapula, medial border. This line will show you the rest of the landmarks. This landmark will show you the rest of the bones and structure you need to know. So we have the acromion, the scapula spine, and the medial border. From there you can figure out the rest of the scapula bones and the humerus, all the way to the elbow. As for the muscles, you can see every muscle clearly. In a developed body, you can see the deltoid, the posterior head of the deltoid, the middle head of the deltoid, trapezius, the infraspinatus, the teres major, and this little dip is the teres minor. So this is all the info I have for the shoulder anatomy. In the next chapter I'm going to talk about some exercises we can do to improve our knowledge in anatomy for the shoulder and any other part of the body. So for the last chapter we can do some practice on what we studied so far. It's gonna help you process the previous information we talked about. Of course, knowing all this data from the previous chapter won't help you unless you practice them repeatedly almost every day, so you can memorize and apply the information you have on anatomy on daily drawing. You can do some partial figure drawing. This is one of the figure drawing session I did before, but you don't have to do the whole body. You can do like part of the figure drawing, so you don't draw all the character, just draw the torso and the shoulders. You can fill a whole sheet with torsos, like the upper part of the torso from different type of bodies, different type of people, female, males, the rest of it. So just fill a whole sheet with these studies, draw the same part over and over till you fix all the mistakes and misconception you have before you studied anatomy for that part of the body. Next up we have the anatomy study. Of course you can study the bones of the scapula, the clavicle, the humerus. You can study the bones themselves, the landmarks, so you know what's going on underneath the surface. It will help you decide how things move, how they look, how they feel on the top. So take your time with it. You can study the bones and the muscles as we studied before in the previous chapters. So try to draw them in different positions. Try to memorize the names of the muscles. It will be like driving a car. Once you understand the bones and the structure, the whole structure underneath the surface, the names, if you practice drawing them a lot, it will be hard to forget either the names or the function of each muscle of the structure underneath. Now another important exercise is of course the tracing we just did in the previous chapter. Try trace a whole bunch of photos of different type of bodies and gender. Try to get all the bones, the muscles like we did. Follow the landmarks to get all the bone structure. Once you have the bones, try to do the muscle structure on top of them. When you do this exercise a lot, try to do a full body. When you study all anatomies, try to draw people you see in reference photo in skeleton, like only skeleton or muscles. So it's like you have an X-ray vision and you're seeing the structure of the bones and muscles underneath the reference photo you are drawing from. It's a little bit creepy exercise, but you will have a lot of fun doing it, and it will benefit you a lot. The final exercise, of course, the imagination and memory. When you're done with all your studies, do quick sketches on your sketchbook, like for different shoulders, arms, in different locations, without looking at a reference or a photo. This will help you with your concept art drawing, with your character design drawing, and drawing basically from imagination. It will also help you memorize what you learned so far. And we are done with the first part of the arm anatomy. I had no idea it will take this long. It took almost 20 days to make this video. The problem is I do these tutorials for myself. I do this tutorial the way I wanted to have them back when I was starting up. Because when I started to draw, I only saw these free tutorials on YouTube, like draw a circle, add more details, and you will have whatever object you are drawing. Or draw this from the front side, back side, 3/4, and that's it. There was very little tutorials that go in depth in explaining why you are seeing the way things are, why things work the way they are. So if I want to draw a certain object, I have to study it from every side, under the hood, over the hood, in every single view, the structure underneath it. This is the way I usually study my own subject. But I don't know if you feel the same way about the tutorial, so please let me know in the comment section if this was too long for you, if it was too much in details, if you want less chapters, if you want just 5-minute videos, or if this worked for you as well. So any feedback on this video will really help me for the second part, the upper arm and the lower arm. So fine-tuning these tutorials will make it better for you and for myself. So the feedback will help me not only on this tutorial series, but also help me on the next tutorial series that I'm planning to do, and any tutorial series I'm planning to do in the future. I have a couple of tutorial series, like the figure drawing I'm still planning to do after the anatomy, and I have how to draw from imagination tutorial series, and also about the values, understanding light and materials. So any feedback on this video will help me in the future tutorial series I'm planning to do. So hope this video helps you with your studies, and I will see you in the next section, the upper arm. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.